everyone, it's Alice, and today I want to recommend a specific type of book for you, which is like books with dark and cozy vibes, which I love reading, so I wanted to share them with you. Now, what I mean by dark and cozy is like books that have cozy elements to them, but they also have darker elements to them. So it's not just straight up cozy books, which can usually be like a little bit on the lighter side. I love it when cozy books have darker themes or darker elements. And it's a hard balance to strike, but like when it's done well, it's so good. Usually the coziness in these types of books comes at least in part from the atmosphere. I find it really cozy to read atmospheric books, so this is just how I'm defining it. But these books are books that you can sort of cuddle up on the couch with when it's like dark outside and maybe raining, and they're just the perfect like mix of cozy, dark, and atmospheric vibes. Just looking at these books makes me want to like snuggle up on the couch in the dark and just read. So let's get into it. The first two books that I have are the two books that are currently out in the Emily Wilde series, and I'm pretty sure the third one is coming out next year, and I'm really excited to read it. So we have Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries and Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. These books are historical fiction fantasy with a sprinkle of romance in them. And in this first book, we're introduced to this Cambridge professor who studies fae and fairies. And she's super intelligent, but she's not great with people, and she much prefers like her books and the company of her dog, which I totally get. And in this book, she goes on this research trip to this little village, and it doesn't take long after she gets there that she has just like rubbed everyone in that village the wrong way, and that causes some problems because she needs to stay there for a while. But then her rival slash friend like shows up on this research trip like uninvited, and he is of course very charming and manages to charm everyone in this village. They end up sort of working together though, and despite our main character's frustration with this guy, they do end up doing some research, and this research leads them into, I don't know what to call it, but like strange worlds and all kinds of adventure. I don't want to go too much into what happens in the second book, but they do spend some time in the Alps, which is really cool. And these books are super atmospheric, and I feel like the settings really add to that. And I think the reason that I really love these books so much is that they manage to have both like really cozy, almost like homey vibes with these like darker elements. And I love how the fae and the fairies are a part of that, because we do get to see some of these other worlds and the worlds that the fae live in, and they are like quite unsettling and like surprisingly dangerous, and there's like a whole vibe to that as well, and that's what adds the sort of darkness, and there's a little bit of danger. I also just love reading about the characters and like their relationship and their friendship. Like, I just love it. The next book that I have is from an author who's quickly becoming one of my favorites. It's Nettle and Bone by Kingfisher, and this is a fantasy novel with a little bit of horror to it, but the horror is really, it's not that bad. It tells the story of this woman who comes from a wealthy family, but she's grown up in this convent and she's spent most of her life there. And she has two sisters, and the sisters like live in the castle and all of that, and they actually both marry the same prince, not at the same time, but like the first sister marries this prince and then she dies, and so the prince comes back for the second sister. And as some time passes after this prince has married the second princess, or the second sister, it becomes apparent to our main character that she needs to go there and save her sister so that she doesn't suffer the same fate as the first sister. To do that though, she needs help, and so she seeks out this powerful grave witch who eventually decides to help her, and then through various events, they are joined by this fairy godmother and this knight slash criminal, and off they go on this quest. There's also a dog made from bones and a chicken possessed by a demon, which tells you a little bit about the tone of this book, which is like, it's kind of dark in a way, but it also has all of this humor to it that just makes it delightful. Although we have different horror elements in here, it really is like a magical story filled with whimsy, and it has this dark fairy tale vibe going on in it, and at the same time it's kind of like, it's just really, really fun and very, very enjoyable. Another book that has a sort of dark fairy tale vibe going on in it is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is historical fiction fantasy, and it starts off in this small Russian village where winter lasts for almost the entire year, and that's where we meet our main character. She lives with her family, and she's generally quite happy until her mother dies, and her father decides to go off to Moscow to find a new wife, and he brings a new wife back, and she is really religious, and she sees the townspeople doing all of these like rituals, like superstitious rituals, and she starts forbidding them to do it. Like, she just tells them, don't do that because it's against her religion. Now, these rituals that the townspeople are doing involve making offerings to like different kinds of house spirits or spirits, and no one can see them except our main character, who actually can. And that makes her a sort of witch, and you can imagine how the religious people feel about that. But she can see these spirits or these creatures, and she's the first to notice what happens when they don't make these offerings, and she's the first to sort of realize that this is actually going to have consequences, and those consequences are catastrophic. Again, the atmosphere in this book is just immaculate. The setting is really good, and I loved all of the magical stuff, and just seeing this world through the main character's eyes and everything that she sees and goes through, and just, I loved meeting all of the different creatures or characters, shall we say, that we meet in here eventually. This is also the first book in a trilogy, so if you like this one, there's more to read. The second one is called The Girl in the Tower, and the third one is called The Winter of the Witch. And if you like this first one, you're gonna like those two books as well. I loved all of them, and it's one of my favorite fantasy trilogies, actually, and it just feels like, yeah, it just feels like a dark fairy tale. Like, that's the perfect way to sum it up. Then we have a book that I read a while ago now, but I still think about it and I still think it's really good. It's The Diviners by Libba Bray, and this is again historical fiction fantasy, but this one is set in the 1920s, and the fantasy leans more like paranormal, I would say. In it, we meet a main character who gets in trouble in her hometown as she is sent to live with her uncle in New York. And the uncle is like obsessed with the occult, and he is like involved with, I don't know, like cases or mysteries where the occult may have something to do with it, which is quite the coincidence because our main character actually has this gift, and this gift is what got her in trouble in her hometown. But basically, she can see things by touching different kinds of objects. So if she touches an object, she can get a sort of vision. This gift of her has caused her quite a lot of problems though, so she's keeping it a secret. But then this young girl is murdered, and she is like found with these cryptic symbols around her, and because of that, her uncle is called to the scene. And when that happens, it occurs to our main character that maybe she can use her gift for something good this time and help out by using it. That's really just the start of it though, and we are mainly following the main character in here, but there are also other characters that we're introduced to in here, and that is how we're sort of introduced to this bigger world, and also to this evil that is awakening, which is basically coming for all of them. This is YA, but I read it as an adult and I still really enjoyed it. I love the setting of this book, like 1920s New York is just amazing. I love reading about the 1920s anyway, so it's no surprise that I really enjoyed that. But like that part of the book is just excellent. I also love just meeting these characters and seeing these different powers. I also do, like, the thing that makes this book dark is one of my favorite things about this book, which is this like evil that is awakening, which, if you want the answer to all of that, you are gonna have to read the other books in this series as well. But like, the way it's presented and introduced to us in this book is so good because that evil has like its own chapters, and those chapters are so like really, really creepy. The series has 4 books in total, and there is an overarching sort of storyline throughout that whole thing, but you could just read the first one and leave it at that if you want that. I think the first one is the best one, but I still think the others are worth reading. Also, just We get to see other characters as well and like different kinds of powers, which is really cool. But yeah, this is like a lot of fun, but also a little dark. The next one that I have is honestly a real stretch to call this cozy, but I just feel like it sort of fits in along with these books, and it's more a sort of atmospheric kind of cozy, like mansion in the middle of foggy woods. Like that's the cozy vibe. It's The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a mystery novel, and it follows a main character who is stuck in a time loop. And in this day that he is reliving, Evelyn Hardcastle is murdered at the end of this day, and he's basically told to solve the murder to get out of the loop. And to make it a little bit more interesting, he doesn't wake up in his own body during these days. He wakes up in different bodies every single day. So the people in this like situation on this day in this estate, he wakes up in different characters' bodies every single day. If you want something to really suck you in, this is the perfect book. Like I said, the setting is like super atmospheric and the story is absolutely wild. It is a little bit confusing at first, I will say, and I think sometimes this book like loses people in the beginning because it is confusing, but once you figure out sort of the flow of it and what's going on, it is so good. It's crazy, but it's so good. I also just, the setting is so good. And I don't want to give it away, but there is an added layer to this of like the time loop and why they're in the time loop, which is really cool. And it's just such a good book. A real trip and really crazy, but so good. I would say this is like an insane twist on the classic whodunit, and it does have some of the like whodunit vibes to it, which I really like. So if it sounds interesting, I would give it a go. Don't look too much into it. Just go into it, and when you figure out what's going on, just go along for the ride. Another mystery novel that I have, which is super atmospheric, is The Strings of Murder by Oscar de Muriel. This is historical fiction, and it's set in Edinburgh in 1888, and we have this case where a violinist has been murdered inside of a locked room, and there are all of these black magic symbols on the walls, and right before this happened, a maid swears that she heard like several instruments playing in the room before this person was murdered, which like, how can there be more than one person inside of a locked room when there's only one dead body? To investigate the case, Scotland Yard sends this inspector from London to Edinburgh, and he is told to team up with this detective who works in like the supernatural cases department, and to this Englishman's great dismay, this Scotsman actually believes this stuff. And just the combination of these two people, like a very uptight Englishman and this slightly insane Scottish guy, like they have to work together to solve this, and it's absolutely crazy. The two of them make quite the pair, and they are really the ones that make this book so much fun to read, because they're just like running around trying to figure this thing out, and the setting is like, obviously it's Edinburgh, but it's constantly like dim and foggy, and it adds a lot of atmosphere to it. There's a lot of elements to the story that I really like. The mystery is really cool, and there's this constant like supernatural feeling to it, which you never know if it's like real or not, and it's just a lot of fun. It is quite ridiculous and it's a little bit over the top, so you sort of have to go along with that, I feel, but the setting is great. And again, I don't know if calling this cozy is like quite right, but I think because it's so fun to read and it's so enjoyable, there is like something cozy about it, because it's dark, but it's not too serious. Then we have a couple of witch books, because of course we do. The first one I don't actually have a physical copy of, but it's A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness, and this is a book that I read years ago. Occasionally people will recommend me this book because I don't think people realize that I've read it, but I have read it and it's really good. I remember loving like the setting and this magical world that we get to see in it. I loved that part. It's fantasy, paranormal romance, I guess you would call it, and it starts off with this young Oxford scholar who is in the library, and she manages to call up this like alchemy manuscript that has been lost for generations, and she comes from a long line of witches, but she's not actually that interested in that whole part of her life. so she sends it back. Like, she doesn't want anything to do with any of this. But the fact that she managed to call this up sort of stirs the supernatural world in here, and so she's sort of pulled into it against her will, and there's all of this history and magic and a very interesting vampire. This is the first book in a series, and I think I only ever made it to the second book. I think I've only read the first two, and although I really like the world and the magic and all of that, there is quite a lot of romance in these books, and so I sort of stopped reading them because of that. Now though, I kind of want to get back into them. I wonder how I would feel about them now. I think I read the first book, like, it was many years ago, and it would be interesting to read again now, because I think when I went into it I wasn't prepared for all of the romance, but now I am. And yeah, I think there are like 5 books out now. Maybe I should start with the first one and just make my way through all of them. I do remember really enjoying the first book though, and I do feel like it sort of fits into that dark, cozy vibe quite nicely. I also want to mention Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman, which isn't really that dark, but it does have a couple of like darker scenes in it, or like darker elements. This has a like immaculate 90s vibe to it that I just think is so good, and it does have a lot of cozy vibes to it. I'm sure a lot of you already know what this book is about, but we basically follow a generation from the Owens family in here, and they are like a long line of witches, and they're all cursed with this curse of being like unlucky in love. And the generation where we meet, we have 2 sisters who grow up in the small town in Massachusetts, and they just want to get out of this town, like it's all they want. But then as adults, we meet them again, and they are, for various reasons, pulled back to this hometown of theirs, and back to the house where their quite mysterious elderly aunts still live. You can really pick any of the books in the series, like this one, or any of the prequels. They're all really good, and they all sort of have the same vibe to them. And Alice Hoffman is an amazing storyteller. She weaves like characters and magic and plot together beautifully, and I love all of these books. Second to last, we have a graphic novel. It's The 100 Nights of Hero by Isabel Greenberg, and this is actually one of my favorite graphic novels ever. It's set in this magical land, in this kingdom, where we meet this woman who is married to this wicked little man who makes a wager with one of his friends that if the friend can seduce the wife within 100 days, he can like get the castle and the wife. Which is like, dude, what's wrong with you? The friend is like, great, easy peasy, I'll go seduce your wife then, and I'll get her castle and the wife. Sounds great. But this wife, she has other plans, and obviously she doesn't want this. So she devises this plan with her maid, who she also happens to be in love with, that they are going to distract this guy by telling him all of these stories. And so night after night, he comes to her and she tells him all of these stories to distract him. And that is also a part of the book, and we see all of these stories, like we're told all of these stories alongside the guy, and yeah, they distract him very successfully. This story has several layers to it. Like, we have this whole story of the wife and them telling stories, but we also have the stories that they tell, and we get to read about that as well. And I don't want to give anything away, but like, it sort of weaves together in the end in a really amazing way. I really like the artwork in this as well. It's a real treat to read. I love the color palette and how the characters are drawn. It's kind of like whimsical, but it fits with the story or stories really well. Also, if you've already read this, Isabel Greenberg has several other graphic novels as well that are also really good. I haven't read all of them, but I really want to. And yeah, this is just such a treat to read. Then at the very end, I wanted to include this little poetry collection. This is Poems Bewitched and Haunted, and this is one of the Everyman's Library collections or whatever they're called, and I just think this is really fun to read. It is the kind of collection that has poems from all kinds of different authors, so there's going to be something for everyone. You're probably not going to love all of it, but you can find some really, you can find some gems in here. Some of these poems are very playful and light, some of them are a little bit more dark and sinister, and we have all kinds of things in here: witches, hags, spells, Halloween poems, all kinds of things, and I think it's a real treat to read. I read this ages ago and I have loads of tabs in it, so usually during spooky season I will revisit the ones that I loved the first time I read it. And I don't know, having a little bit of poetry in your life is always good. Okay, everyone, that was the last book that I had for you today. Now, I would love to know if any of you have any dark, cozy book recommendations, because I'm always looking for more of these kinds of books, but I find them a little bit difficult to find because you can't always tell that it's that kind of book until you've read it. So if you have anything similar to this, or you can just think of something that you think would fit, please let me know. I would love all of your recommendations. That was kind of it for today, though. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!